Well, one of the ways that people have tried to deal with the apparent intolerance of the biblical tradition and its monotheistic sense of the one true God is that they've tried to say what we need is just like a sense of open-endedness to our religion that embraces all people and is more inclusive and so on. And I'm in many ways super sympathetic to these approaches, but I've seen a fascinating parallel between those attempts at sort of dimming down the intolerance of biblical religion, a parallel between that and the way in which liberalism has been faring in recent generations. This has been noted by Chantal Mouffe, who's a Belgian social theorist. And Mouffe notices how we must come to realize that the movements towards a sort of liberal openness in our society is becoming a new form of hegemonic oppression. And so, whether that's in France with liberalism means for them a sense of banning headscarves for Muslims, which is this sort of ironic way in which openness and tolerance becomes intolerant. And so one of the challenges, I think, shared between both people of religious background and anybody who has hope in the democratic liberal traditions of our societies is that we can't just escape boundaries. There's no such thing as living a boundaryless, or in Girard's terms, there's no such thing as living in a totally sacrificeless society. There's always going to be boundaries and exclusions. And so the challenge, I think, in a lot of our society is we're coming to realize the desire to create a perfectly open and inclusive society becomes its own oppressive form of inclusivity. And much of the alt-right has been a total reaction to this by saying, we're just going to backlash against liberalism and attack its sense of safe spaces and attack its sense of inclusivity. And it's brought upon a whiplash of neo-Nazism. I think what is necessary in between these two intense opposites of like the alt-right or a supposedly all-inclusive liberalism is to find a tension within the middle of trying to pursue ways in which we can have a more democratic, inclusive culture, but recognizing that still liberalism too is an exclusive way of thinking. It still has boundaries. Democracy excludes some things and puts in others. There's no easy resolution to this tension. And so for me, a lot of what Christianity means is that living in society never has some sort of ultimate solution. You can't just retreat into saying, well, just give us our religious liberty and we will be happy. No, we need to be committed to trying to making our society more just and even more inclusive. But even as we do that, it's still going to involve boundaries, exclusions, even sacrifices. And that is really a tenuous, difficult thing. But to me, mature thinking, mature politics, and even mature faith means that you've come to realize that there's no easy solutions, no easy answers. And if there are any, they're only in the mind of God and they're not in ours. So for me, in a way, monotheism, its whole point is to say, nobody has this one truth. We all need to continually live in this tension that nobody can sort of represent the full monopoly on divine truth, but we must live within a pluralistic tension. Yeah, so some huge questions facing us now is how to try to pursue a world not based on scapegoating or exclusion, and yet needs to live and operate through the politics and structures of our society? How do you live in this tension between political forces and trying to even unseat certain political forces and push for others? Is there a way to do that while not also scapegoating? Is there a such thing as having a politics without scapegoating? That is a huge question for us. Is there a way in which biblical faith informs a sense of, an allegiance to God that transcends all political forms of allegiance that are sort of vying for our allegiance in the nation state, that rejects those as idolatry, and yet that doesn't become totally alienated from the structures of our world, that doesn't just become a sort of secessionist leaving of everything behind. That is another way of putting how do we live in this tension between the sort of earthly and heavenly city in Augustine's terms. And the most supreme empirical thing that we're facing is the massive global onslaught of everything that industrial capitalism is wreaking upon our planet. We are benefiting from the most rich and technologically advanced civilization in the world that is also entirely destroying our civilization within the next century. What does it take to become rightly alarmed about that in a way that doesn't also just provoke reaction from those who are opposed to that? So is there a way to become genuinely, even intensely concerned about the human-made apocalypse of the coming century without provoking a sort of new violent alarmism?